after Bradley Beal, who's number 4, and Paul George, number 5, to round out the top 5, get into the top 3. Unlike other positions like small forward, there isn't a top 3 that really stands out aside from the rest of the top 5. And the top 5 on their own are just great, amazing players. But it's really comes down to personal preference and how they played 10 the year last year. So this one at number 3 is Donovan Mitchell from the Utah Jazz. And I think he just Mitchell and Murray were going to town against each other last year. During those playoffs, Mitchell averaged like 36 points in the playoffs. It was amazing. He just showcased that before those playoffs started, I would have had him at number 5, behind those 2 other players. But he just showed that he right now is the better player on the better team.
Yeah, and I mean that's really what it came down to where, like you said, when you look at Donovan Mitchell, and if you were just to look at that stat line, you'd be pretty content putting him fifth, where he's a guy who he isn't necessarily he's not the best defender, he's gotten better over the years, but he's not bad at this point, and he does have a really good ability, obviously, on the offensive end, but to say he every year would be better than a guy like Bradley Beal, Paul George, it's definitely really hard. But like you said, the ability of him last year to show up in the playoffs and really prove himself as a winner, even though they didn't win. It was a situation where if he wasn't playing against Jamal Murray, it would have been lights out. It would have been one of the best recent playoff performances we've seen. But like I said, it really showed his ability that a lot of people in Utah already felt he had, is that he's just a huge difference maker. That's why they gave up Gordon Hayward. That's why they're comfortable, because they know when it comes down to it, Donovan Mitchell could really win them some games, and he clearly has been.
And definitely. And one thing that we stand them apart from like Bradley Beal. And we were talking before that Bradley Beal could easily be with his step points per game that he put up 30. We're talking 36 for after the All-Star break last year. Like that's a way bigger amount of games than what Mitchell did in the playoffs. But team success has a lot to come into that, right? Jazz have been very successful with Mitchell as their best player. And I was just talking about how Beal lacks defensively, because where he does miss a guy, where he does say have a mental lapse, say a guy blows by him, and because he doesn't have an interior presence, that guy scores 9 times out of 10. Well, Mitchell doesn't have that problem. Is Mitchell definitely 100% better than Bradley Beal on defense? I don't know. I don't need to know. Mitchell has the people behind him. Rudy Gobert, overall, that Jazz system is very defensively minded, and they can erase a mistake by him. I'm not saying he makes mistakes often, but I'm saying you don't see those mistakes statistically as much as you would see it with a player like Bradley Beal, just based on the players that are around him. With that being said, Mitchell is he a bad offensive player? No. Did he put up as much as Bradley Beal last year? No, but generally, I'd say they're very, very similar on the offensive end. I'd say everyone from the 3 to 5 range, even including Paul George in that category, are very good offensive players that can put up 25 points per game on any given year. But that defensive prowess that Mitchell has shown in the last couple of years by being part of that great defensive squad is what kind of made him to that next level. And of course, that bubble performance that really showed us that he can be that 35 point per game player if he ever needs to be, but they just don't need him to do it most of the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's ironic almost that the support of someone else can help you gain a ranking, but it's definitely true that the help defense that Mitchell is able to gain through guys like Gobert definitely helps him avoid being a worse real plus minus player. Not saying that he would necessarily be a bad one, but saying that he does, like you said, gain some benefit from these other guys versus a guy like Beal doesn't. And even though Beal did put up more points per game, the fact that we've seen Mitchell do it in the hardest element possible. Also, yes, Bradley Beal has had a couple good playoff runs, but he hasn't had, like you said, a 36-point game, a 36 per game playoff series like Donovan Mitchell did last year. And it's not even like Mitchell, like a lot of other series we talks about, did it on like let's say 43 minutes per game. This is a guy who's still only playing 37 minutes per game, which is close to doable in the regular season. Definitely still going to play a couple less minutes. But the fact he was pretty much getting a point per minute, that's on a guy like Giannis's level, who is obviously number one on his specific list. And the fact that he was also doing other things too, like he still had 5 and 5 in the other categories too. So it's not like he was just keeping the ball and
Yep.
passing. He did have 4 turnovers per game, but at the same time, that's because again he was doing everything for that Utah Jazz team. And this goes to show that maybe on a specific year, Donovan Mitchell might be in the company of a guy like James Harden as a 30 point per game guy over an entire year because he's shown the ability to do it at least over a playoff series. So at least we know somewhat there's potential for that.
When it counts, he's shown that he shows up, right? And that's something that we never thought we would see in that Utah squad. Whenever it comes down to the offense in the playoffs, whenever you're not a top tier offensive team, typically historically top tier defensive teams don't make it for far deep runs. Historically, we're like maybe the Detroit Pistons from 05 or 5, um, buck that trend. But other than that, um, Utah needed to know they had a player that can step up and do this. And I don't think they knew it before going into last year. I thought they were really, really hoping it in Mitchell. But now that they know it, it just unlocks them to a whole another contender status at this point.
Yeah, I feel like they already knew it personally. That's why they had so much hope for him. I feel like anyone you heard speak to out of Utah knew he already had it. I think this was just him
But
showing it
not
to
to
everyone.
this level, though.
Oh, no, I don't think anyone thinks like even if you said, hey, if you said, okay, for example, just think like even if you told me James Harden 2 years ago put up 36 points per game, off the top of my head, I'd be like, no, he didn't. Like, but you look at it, he actually did. Like, you don't expect a guy to put up 36 points per game over a number of games, but clearly when they're at that level, they're able to do those things. And Donovan Mitchell, we're expecting him this year to actually improve clearly on his average of like last couple of years he's been between a 22 to 24 point per game guy. Clearly, we have
He'll be 25 next year.
exactly. We have him above Bradley Beal for a reason. We think he's going to be a bit better. We have him above Paul George for a reason. We think he's going to be a bit better. So we'll see how much improvement he makes over the whole year. But we're confident it's going to be an improvement, and I'm excited to see it.
Yep, and I was very happy to see that you had him that highly ranked as well because I definitely think highly of him, and the fact that we are on the same page on that one was really good. The Spider Mitchell,
Who do we have
good guy.
above the all-star, the superstar Donovan Mitchell? I mean, we don't have a
Well,
super.
now it gets no fun because if anyone's actually watching, if you guys are watching them all, then you're gonna find out that there's only two people in your head still.